Polcha, presenting on the effects of increasing the contributions based on Social Security solvency. I know, I can't pronounce it.
Since its inception in 1935, Social Security has been a staple in the American retirement system. Along with personally funded retirement plans, company-funded retirement plans, Social Security forms the third pillar of the American retirement system. However, Social Security will soon be losing money. If nothing changes, by the year 2034, Social Security will become insolvent. One change that I want to look at is the effects of increasing the contribution base on Social Security solvency. And as Monica said, my name is Mark Polcha, and my advisor was Dr. David Hudak. So in a 2008 primary debate in Philadelphia, Barack Obama said, "What I propose is that we raise the cap on the payroll tax because right now millionaires and billionaires don't have to pay beyond $97,000 a year." In the statement, the payroll tax is synonymous with the contribution base. Ironically enough, Hillary Clinton rejected Barack Obama's statement, saying that it should not take place because it will affect the lower and middle class. As you'll see later on in my presentation, Hillary Clinton was completely ignorant of the fact and completely wrong as well. So now that we're talking about contribution bases, we should ask ourselves, what is a contribution base? The contribution base is the maximum amount of earnings which is taxed by Social Security. So what level of your earnings is taxed by Social Security? This value applies for both the employee and the employer who pay 6.2% Social Security tax. So take for instance, in 2014, the value was $117,000. That means for every dollar you earned up to $117,000, you and your employer would have to pay 6.2%. For every dollar over $117,000, you wouldn't pay anything. Wouldn't it be nice to make $117,000? In 2015, this value increased to $119,100. In order to calculate the contribution base, you take a look at the wage index relative to 1992. So the Social Security Administration has a value for the wage index in 1992. You look at the wage index in the current year, you divide the two and round to the nearest $300, and that's how you get the value for the contribution base. So how do we go about changing the contribution base? Well, there's two different criteria that we could change. Either we could raise the contribution base, or we could eliminate it altogether, or we could increase the benefit amount that someone receives after an increase in the contribution base, or we could leave it unchanged. Therefore, there's four different scenarios we can look at when changing the contribution base. Eliminating the contribution base and leaving the annual benefit unchanged would provide the maximum increase to the Social Security Trust Fund. However, that could be seen as unethical, as you're making people pay more money but not giving it back to them in return. So what effects does a change in contribution base have? Well, the Congressional Budget Office in 2010 suggested that we should raise the contribution base to $250,000. They said this option will improve the 75-year actuarial balance by 0.5 percentage points relative to GDP. And this would push back the insolvency date by 38 years to 2077. In 2007, at another Democratic debate, Barack Obama suggested eliminating the contribution base altogether and said that this would lead to a $1.2 trillion increase in tax revenue. Well, that doesn't take into account the idea of increasing a benefit amount that a person should receive once they retire. However, $1.2 trillion would go a long way to helping Social Security. Now, I keep throwing around this idea of a trust fund and how it's involved in Social Security. And in the near future, it's going to start depleting. But why is the trust fund important, and what is it altogether? Well, the trust fund is not a fund in the typical sense that you go to the bank, put in money, earn interest on it, and can take it out whenever you want. There's actually no economic assets involved in it. The government doesn't take your excess revenue from taxes and put it into a fund. Instead, they borrow the taxes in the form of bonds, and they promise to pay it back in the future once it's needed. Now, since it's the government issuing the bonds, they tend to issue a lower interest rate than what's typically issued on T-bills at the time. So the trust fund will begin depleting by the year 2023. This means that Social Security will start paying out more revenue than it's paying in. And by the year 2034, the Social Security trust fund will be completely depleted, which means that they'll only be able to pay about 75% of promised benefits. I say that raising contribution base, in theory, would bring in excess revenue. Intuitively, this makes sense, as I'll show you later on. This will hinder the depletion of the trust fund and push back the insolvency date by a few years. In order to see how changes will occur, I developed an Excel model to look at differences in benefits based on different criteria. However, to do that, I had to use some assumptions. So the first assumptions I used in my model were program-specific assumptions. These include areas such as the wage index, the contribution base, the bend points, and cost of living adjustments. Now, these assumptions are made by the Social Security Administration in their annual trustees report. For all these assumptions, there's 3 different levels. There's high cost, intermediate cost, and low cost. For actuarial predictions and projections, they use the intermediate costs. For the demographics of my model and for the income, I use the United States Census Bureau. They provide both past data and projections into the future. When looking at income assumptions, I use the uniform distribution of income. In reality, it's more modeled by an exponential distribution. However, between small increments of income, say $5,000 increments, a uniform distribution provides an accurate approximation with much simpler mathematics. And finally, for my mortality assumptions, I use the standard ultimate mortality table. Now, when looking at changes in the contribution base, there's 6 different scenarios that can occur. There's 3 income scenarios. First, a person can be consistently below the contribution base for their whole career. This means that, say, in 2015 terms, they never make above $117,000. On the flip side, they can be consistently above the contribution base every single year. Or they could be in the middle between the old and new contribution base amount. Again, there's 2 different scenarios that could occur. You could raise their benefit amount upon retirement, or you could leave the individual's benefit amount unchanged. 3 times 2 gives you 6 different scenarios that can occur. I will provide you with one example in this presentation. And I will assume that an individual is age 25 and starting employment in the year 2015. This individual will retire at age 65. Normally they could retire anywhere between age 62 and 70. I'm just going to assume that they retire at age 65 for simplicity's sake. When changing contribution base, I'll increase it from $119,100, which is its value currently, to $140,000. This is approximately $20,000 difference and about 17% change. The interest to the trust fund will be credited at 2.9%, and I'm going to model up until the year 2040. I do this again for simplicity's sake and because I just want to look at how can we change Social Security in the short term. In my actual paper, I use 6 different examples, one for somebody aged 25, 35, 45, 55, and 65, to model how this changes over different years. So first I looked at someone who's consistently earning below the contribution base. Absolutely no change will occur in either the tax revenue that comes in or the benefits that go out. And this makes common sense. If your contribution base is up here and someone's earning an income down here, say $30,000, no matter where I change this, it doesn't drop below their income level. So going back to Hillary Clinton's comment, there really is no backing for what she said. This actually only affects about the top 6% of the population increasing the contribution base, because 94% will be consistently below this level. So hopefully by this presidential campaign, she's become much smarter. Now I'll look at someone who consistently earns above the contribution base. This applies to about 2.62% of the population. So, based on the salary scale that I used in my model, increasing salary by about 3% per year, and the contribution base increase, which under the intermediate assumptions is about 4% per year, an individual must make $164,909 in the year 2015 to consistently stay above the benefit or the contribution base amount. So up here I have an equation that shows you how really increasing the tax revenue in the next year. The 1.124 corresponds to the 12.4% that employers and employees pay, 6.2% each. And then there'll be a change in the contribution base because that's how much more tax is going to be collected. So it ends up being 0.124 times $20,900, which is my assumption for change in the contribution base, which gives you $2,591.80 extra revenue per year. So then I took this as a life contingent annuity over the next 25 years to model it up until the year 2040, and came up with a value of $95,334.60 added to the trust fund. And this is just for one individual. Since they retired at age 65, which is past the year 2040, it's not really relevant how much their benefit amount increases. But for completion's sake, I included up here their benefit amount will increase by $17,904, and that's an annual amount. So finally, I'll look at what happens between two contribution-based values. Your increase in tax revenue will be slightly different. Since you never hit the new contribution base amount, you just take your salary minus the old contribution base and multiply it by the 0.124. And you'll come up with a value of $1,351.60. Similar to the last calculation, I took the life contingent annuity, which means that they'll keep paying in this amount of money contingent on the fact that they live that year. And that'll give you a 25-year increase of $49,716.12. When taking this calculation, I also consider that any money you put in this year will accrue interest over the next several years. And their change in benefit amount in this situation will be $3,818.11. And this situation applies to the last 3.4% of the population. So from these basic examples, it's clear to see that the contribution base, if you increase it, it will lead to an increase in the trust fund. As you look at older demographics, say the age 55 individual, there will be less change because they have less years of increased tax amount. So this really targets the younger population and the wealthier population. So the top 6% of income earners in the country. So what I would like to do is take this data from the 6 examples that I've done in my thesis and apply it to full population data. However, there's just so many moving parts in that calculation that it's really difficult to model it for a full population. You have different mortality assumptions as years change, different age demographics, different populations, different income demographics, and it's just really difficult to model all that at once for every single scenario. I would also be interested in seeing how a change in the contribution base acts with another change in the Social Security benefit calculation, say a tax increase or decrease. This could be almost a political playing chip where you could say, I'll increase the tax rate, but decrease the contribution base and offset the cost a little bit while still improving Social Security solvency. However, regardless of what takes place, something has to change soon in order to keep Social Security solvent long past the year 2034. Thank you.